My parents and sister were arrested for breaking into what they thought was my apartment. They didn't know I'd sold the place 3 weeks earlier, right after my family decided my 31-year-old sister, Emily, would be moving in with me. Whether I liked it or not, for 6 years, I'd been Emily's personal safety net. Every time she lost a job for showing up late, got evicted for throwing parties, or maxed out credit cards while unemployed, the solution was always the same: call Alex. Alex has that nice apartment with extra space, Mom had said during the phone call, that changed everything. Emily needs to get back on her feet, and you're doing so well for yourself. Extra space. It was a 1-bedroom apartment I'd worked 60-hour weeks to afford. My sanctuary. The one place where I didn't have to deal with Emily's latest crisis. But when Mom announced Emily was moving in next weekend and had already rented a U-Haul, she crossed a line I'd been waiting 6 years for someone to cross. That's when I decided to solve this problem the same way I'd solved all the others. Except this time, I was solving it for me. And my family's arrest for trespassing was just the beginning of what happened when they finally pushed the family ATM too far. This pattern didn't start recently. Since I was 8 years old, I'd been the family's go-to solution for any problem that required actual work or responsibility. When Emily broke something, I cleaned it up. When she failed a class, I helped her with makeup assignments. When she crashed Dad's car at 16, somehow it became my responsibility to research insurance claims and find a cheaper replacement. Emily learned early that tears and "I don't know how to handle this" could transfer any problem directly to her younger brother. My parents reinforced this system religiously. "Alex is so good with details," Mom would say. "Alex will figure out a solution," Dad would add. What they really meant was, "Alex will handle this so we don't have to." By the time I graduated college, I'd become the family's professional problem solver. Every month brought a new Emily crisis that required my time, money, or both. I'd been the family's default problem solver for 26 years. Emily's track record was impressively consistent. In 5 years since graduating, she'd been fired from 7 jobs for attendance issues, evicted from 3 apartments for lease violations, and had declared financial emergencies requiring family bailouts at least 15 times. Her pattern was simple: make impulsive decisions, ignore obvious consequences, then act shocked when reality hit. Last year alone, she'd been fired from a coffee shop for showing up hungover, lost her apartment lease for hosting loud parties during the week, and somehow spent her entire unemployment benefits on a vacation to Mexico because she needed to clear her head. Each crisis followed the same script: frantic phone calls to Mom calling me, and somehow I'd end up covering her rent security deposits or credit card payments. The most infuriating part was how she wore her irresponsibility like a personality trait. "I'm just not good with money," she'd say, with a laugh as if mathematical incompetence was charming. Alex is the organized one in the family. She'd tell people like my competence existed solely to compensate for her chaos. Emily was 31 and had never solved a single problem herself. Meanwhile, I'd spent 3 years saving for a 1-bedroom apartment that would finally give me some space from the family dysfunction. No more surprise visits from Emily when she was between apartments. No more guilt trips from Mom about helping family. No more phone calls about emergencies that somehow became my emergencies. My apartment was my sanctuary. 800 square feet of peace where I could work on my projects read without interruption and exist without someone else's crisis landing on my doorstep. It was the first space I'd ever had that felt completely mine. But Emily had no idea that being the default problem solver was about to become someone else's job. The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday evening while I was making dinner. Mom's voice had that cheerful, matter-of-fact tone she used when announcing decisions that weren't actually up for discussion. "Hi, honey. Just wanted to let you know Emily's going to be staying with you for a while. She lost the apartment something about noise complaints, and she needs a place to get back on her feet. She'll be moving in this Saturday." I stopped stirring my pasta. "Moving in, Mom? We never discussed this." "Well, it's just temporary until she finds something else. You have that nice big apartment, and Emily really needs help right now. She's already rented the U-Haul for Saturday morning." "Big apartment, Mom." "It's 1 bedroom. Where exactly is she supposed to sleep?" "Oh, you'll figure something out. You always do. Emily just needs some stability while she looks for work and saves up for a deposit. Family helps family, Alex." There it was. The magic phrase that had governed my life for 26 years. Family helps family. Which translated to Alex solves problems while everyone else creates them. Mom called to tell me Emily would be moving in next week. I hung up the phone and stared at my apartment. My sanctuary. The peaceful space I'd worked 60-hour weeks to afford. In 4 days, it would be invaded by Emily's chaos. Her late-night phone calls, her inability to clean up after herself, and her endless stream of dramatic crises that would inevitably become my responsibility to solve. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how they didn't ask. They announced how my own space, my own life, my own boundaries meant nothing when Emily needed something. How I'd become so reliable as the family problem solver that they'd stopped pretending I had a choice. By morning, I'd made a decision that would solve this problem permanently. I called a real estate agent, scheduled a market evaluation, and listed my apartment for sale. The market was hot, and my place was in perfect condition. 3 weeks later, I had a buyer and a closing date. I signed the sale papers and didn't say anything to anyone. The next 3 weeks were surreal. I watched my family orchestrate an elaborate moving operation for an apartment I'd sold, while they made plans around my kitchen table. Emily came over twice to measure spaces and discuss where her furniture would go. She brought measuring tape and a notebook sketching out furniture arrangements like she was an interior designer. Mom coordinated with Dad about borrowing his truck for smaller items. They debated whether Emily needed to bring her own microwave or if she could share mine. Dad researched moving truck rental companies and compared prices like this was a major corporate relocation. Emily had scheduled the U-Haul for Saturday morning pickup and enlisted 2 of her friends to help with the heavy lifting. She'd already canceled her storage unit because why pay for storage when I'll have a real place to live? She'd even started a group chat with our cousins to organize a moving day pizza party at my apartment to celebrate her fresh start. The guest list included 12 people she'd invited to celebrate her new living situation in my 1-bedroom sanctuary. Emily had created a moving timeline with color-coded spreadsheets assigned tasks to different helpers and researched the most efficient packing strategies. She was approaching this move with more organization than she'd shown for any job or responsibility in her entire adult life. Emily rented a U-Haul for an apartment that wasn't mine anymore. Meanwhile, Emily had transformed this inconvenience to my life into her personal housing victory tour. She posted on Facebook about finally moving somewhere stable and having a supportive family. The post included photos of boxes labeled Emily's New Beginning and got 47 likes from family friends who commented about how lucky she was to have such a generous brother. She'd already mentally redecorated my living room, explaining how her vintage couch would look better against the far wall and how my furniture arrangement was too masculine and sterile for the space. She'd picked out throw pillows, planned to repaint the bedroom walls in warmer colors, and discussed hanging her art collection throughout the apartment. She'd started referring to it as our place in conversations which made my skin crawl. Our place has better natural light than my old apartment, she'd tell friends. The kitchen in our place is perfect for cooking actual meals. She was already planning girls' nights, dinner parties, and weekend brunches in my sanctuary, talking about how nice it would be to have proper space to entertain decent people. Emily had even started making demands about apartment rules. No overnight guests without permission. Her permission, apparently. Quiet hours after 10 p.m. because she was trying to get her sleep schedule back on track for job hunting. She wanted to discuss splitting utilities and groceries, though she conveniently hadn't mentioned splitting rent since she was getting back on her feet, and didn't want to burden Alex with financial pressure. Emily was packing boxes for an apartment that was no longer mine. The guilt trip campaign started immediately and intensely. Dad called me Wednesday night to talk about family obligations and how real men step up when their sisters need help. He reminded me that they'd sacrificed for my college education, paid for my textbooks, and helped me with my first apartment deposit. According to Dad, successful people have a responsibility to lift up family members who are struggling, and my reluctance to enthusiastically embrace Emily's moving plan showed selfishness and ingratitude. Mom was more subtle, but equally manipulative. She'd mention how Emily was finally showing some responsibility by planning ahead, and how this living arrangement could be good for both of us, since Emily could help with cleaning, cooking, and household maintenance. She painted it as some kind of mutual benefit, rather than Emily moving into my space rent-free while I funded her lifestyle transition. "I just think it's wonderful that you're in a position to help your sister," Mom said, during one particularly nauseating phone call. "This is what family looks like, supporting each other through difficult times. Your grandmother would be so proud to see you stepping up." Dad said family helps family, but he had no idea help was moving out. The next 3 weeks were surreal. I watched my family orchestrate an elaborate moving operation for an apartment I'd sold, while they made plans around my kitchen table. Emily came over twice to measure spaces and discuss where her furniture would go. She brought measuring tape and a notebook sketching out furniture arrangements like she was an interior designer. Mom coordinated with Dad about borrowing his truck for smaller items. They debated whether Emily needed to bring her own microwave, or if she could share mine. Dad researched moving truck rental companies and compared prices like this was a major corporate relocation. Emily had scheduled the U-Haul for Saturday morning pickup and enlisted 2 of her friends to help with the heavy lifting. She had already canceled her storage unit because why pay for storage when I'll have a real place to live? She had even started a group chat with our cousins to organize a moving day pizza party at my apartment to celebrate her fresh start. The guest list included 12 people she'd invited to celebrate her new living situation in my 1-bedroom sanctuary. Emily had created a moving timeline with color-coded spreadsheets assigned tasks to different helpers and researched the most efficient packing strategies. She was approaching this move with more organization than she'd shown for any job or responsibility in her entire adult life. Emily rented a U-Haul for an apartment that wasn't mine anymore. Meanwhile, Emily had transformed this inconvenience to my life into her personal housing victory tour. She posted on Facebook about finally moving somewhere stable and having a supportive family. The post included photos of boxes labeled Emily's New Beginning and got 47 likes from family friends who commented about how lucky she was to have such a generous brother. She had already mentally redecorated my living room, explaining how her vintage couch would look better against the far wall and how my furniture arrangement was too masculine and sterile for the space. She'd picked out throw pillows planned to repaint the bedroom walls in warmer colors and discussed hanging her art collection throughout the apartment. She'd started referring to it as our place in conversations which made my skin crawl. "Our place has better natural light than my old apartment," she'd tell friends. "The kitchen in our place is perfect for cooking actual meals." She was already planning girls' nights, dinner parties, and weekend brunches in my sanctuary, talking about how nice it would be to have proper space to entertain decent people. Emily had even started making demands about apartment rules. No overnight guests without permission. Her permission, apparently. Quiet hours after 10 p.m. because she was trying to get her sleep schedule back on track for job hunting. She wanted to discuss splitting utilities and groceries, though she conveniently hadn't mentioned splitting rent since she was getting back on her feet, and didn't want to burden Alex with financial pressure. Emily was packing boxes for an apartment that was no longer mine. The guilt trip campaign started immediately and intensely. Dad called me Wednesday night to talk about family obligations and how real men step up when their sisters need help. He reminded me that they'd sacrificed for my college education, paid for my textbooks, and helped me with my first apartment deposit. According to Dad, successful people have a responsibility to lift up family members who are struggling, and my reluctance to enthusiastically embrace Emily's moving plan showed selfishness and ingratitude. Mom was more subtle, but equally manipulative. She'd mention how Emily was finally showing some responsibility by planning ahead, and how this living arrangement could be good for both of us, since Emily could help with cleaning, cooking, and household maintenance. She painted it as some kind of mutual benefit, rather than Emily moving into my space rent-free while I funded her lifestyle transition. "I just think it's wonderful that you're in a position to help your sister," Mom said during one particularly nauseating phone call. "This is what family looks like, supporting each other through difficult times. Your grandmother would be so proud to see you stepping up." Dad said family helps family, but he had no idea help was moving out. The new tenant had apparently called 911 while my family was trying to force their way into the building. I watched from my car as 2 police cruisers pulled into the parking lot, their lights flashing but sirens off. The officers approached the scene professionally, taking in the U-Haul truck, the scattered boxes, and my family clustered around the building entrance. Officer Martinez, according to his name tag, was a veteran cop who looked like he'd seen this type of domestic dispute before. His partner, Officer Chen, started taking notes immediately, while Martinez began interviewing the participants. The new tenant calmly explained that she lived in the apartment and had called police when strangers tried to force entry into her building. Emily immediately launched into her story about how this was all a misunderstanding, how her brother lived in 3B, and how this woman was obviously some kind of squatter who needed to be removed. She spoke with the confident entitlement of someone who'd never faced real consequences for her behavior. Dad tried to support Emily's version by explaining that they'd driven all the way across town with a moving truck and helpers, obviously proving this was planned and legitimate. Mom added tearful comments about family helping family, and how they just wanted to get Emily settled in her new home. The officers listened patiently, then asked to see documentation. The new tenant immediately produced her lease agreement, her driver's license with the 3B address, and several pieces of mail delivered to her at that address over the past week. Her paperwork was organized official and unambiguously proved her legal residency. 2 police officers arrived to investigate the disturbance. Officer Martinez reviewed the new tenant's documentation, while Officer Chen asked my family for their proof of residency. That's when things got interesting. Emily couldn't produce a lease because she didn't have one. Dad couldn't show any documentation because Alex me had never given them any. Mom couldn't provide proof because they'd never asked for any. Officer Martinez looked up from the lease documents and addressed my family directly. "Ma'am, sir, based on the documentation provided, this woman is the legal tenant of apartment 3B. Attempting to force entry into her residence constitutes criminal trespassing under state law. The fact that you brought moving equipment and helpers suggests premeditated intent to unlawfully occupy the premises." Emily's face went white. "But my brother lives there. He's lived there for 3 years. Do you have documentation proving your brother's current residency? A lease agreement, utility bills, Official mail. That's when I decided it was time to get out of my car and join the conversation. I walked over to the group, and Emily's face lit up with relief. "Alex, finally tell these officers that you live in 3B and that I'm supposed to move in with you." I looked at Emily, then at my parents, Moss, then at the officers. "Actually, officers, I need to clarify something important." Officer Martinez turned his attention to me. "Are you the brother they're referring to?" "I am, but I don't live in 3B anymore." I pulled out my phone and showed them the photos I'd taken of my closing documents 3 weeks earlier. "I sold this apartment 3 weeks ago. Here's my sale contract, the closing statement, and the property transfer records." The officer examined my phone screen and nodded. "So you no longer have any legal claim to this property?" "None whatsoever. I sold it to a real estate investment company and they rented it to..." I gestured toward the new tenant. "This woman who is the legitimate tenant." Officer Chen looked up from his notes. "Sir, did your family know you had sold the apartment?" "No, I didn't tell them." I looked at my parents and Emily, watching their expressions change from confusion to understanding to horror. They announced Emily would be moving in without asking me, so I solved the problem by selling the place. The officer explained that forcing entry was criminal trespassing. Emily's mouth fell open. Dad's face turned red, with what I recognized as barely contained rage. Mom looked like she was about to faint. The new tenant watched this family drama unfold with the fascination of someone watching a reality TV show. Officer Martinez closed his notebook and looked at my family. "Based on the evidence presented, you attempted to force entry into a residence where you have no legal standing. The property owner has confirmed that you had no permission to be here. This constitutes criminal trespassing, and the current tenant has the right to press charges." He turned to the new tenant. "Ma'am, would you like to file criminal charges against these individuals for attempted trespassing?" Then he looked at me. "Sir, as the former property owner who was aware of this situation, would you like to file charges for conspiracy to commit trespassing?" The police officer asked me if I wanted to press charges for trespassing. The moment the officers mentioned criminal charges, my family went into full panic mode. Emily immediately started crying and launched into her victim script, the same performance I'd seen her use to get out of consequences her entire life. "This is all just a misunderstanding," she sobbed to Officer Martinez. "We're family. Alex wouldn't do this to us. He's always helped me before when I needed somewhere to stay. I've been homeless for 2 weeks and I just needed my brother's help." Mom joined the emotional manipulation campaign, grabbing my arm with tears in her eyes. "Alex, honey, you can't let them arrest your sister over a simple miscommunication. We're family. We stick together through difficult times. Your grandmother would be heartbroken to see you doing this to Emily." Dad tried the authoritarian approach. "Son, you need to tell these officers that this is a family matter and that we can work this out privately. Emily made an honest mistake, and there's no reason to involve the legal system over a housing confusion." But the officers weren't buying their emotional manipulation routine. Mom tried crying about family loyalty while handcuffed. Officer Chen read from his notes while explaining the legal reality to my increasingly desperate family. "Attempting to force entry into a residence where you don't have legal standing is criminal trespassing. The fact that you brought moving equipment and multiple people suggests this was planned, which could elevate the charges." Officer Martinez continued the explanation. "Even if there was a family arrangement once the property was sold, any previous agreements became void. The new tenant has exclusive legal rights to the property, and attempting to enter without permission constitutes breaking and entering." Emily's voice got higher and more panicked. "But this is insane. You can't arrest people for family disputes." "Ma'am, this isn't a family dispute. This is attempted criminal trespassing against a legal resident who called police because strangers tried to force their way into her home." Officer Chen looked directly at Emily. "The severity of the charges will depend on several factors, including your cooperation and whether the victims want to pursue prosecution. But breaking and entering is a felony. The officer said breaking and entering was a felony. The reality was starting to sink in for my parents. Dad's face had gone from red to pale as he realized that their family problem solver was gone, and Emily's problems were now completely their responsibility. "Alex," Dad said quietly, pulling me aside while the officers continued their investigation. "We need to fix this. Emily can't handle legal trouble. She doesn't have money for lawyers or bail. We need you to tell them this was all a misunderstanding." Mom joined him, whispering urgently. "She's your sister, Alex. She's made mistakes, but she doesn't deserve to have a criminal record over this. Can't you just tell them that you forgot to mention you'd sold the place?" I looked at my parents, who had spent 31 years enabling Emily's irresponsible behavior, and then turning to me to clean up the consequences. Dad realized Emily's housing crisis was now his problem. Officer Martinez approached our group. "We need to decide how to proceed. Sir," he said to me, "you have the option to decline pressing charges, which would likely result in the family being released with a warning." Dad's eyes lit up with hope. He turned to me with desperate relief. "See, Alex, you can fix this. Just tell them you don't want to press charges and we can all go home." "What are we supposed to do now?" Dad asked me, using the same tone he'd used for 26 years whenever Emily created a crisis that needed solving. I looked at him calmly. "Figure it out." Dad asked, "What are we supposed to do now?" And I said, "Figure it out." My calm refusal to help them was apparently the final straw. Both the new tenant and I confirmed we wanted to press charges. Officer Martinez began the arrest procedures, while Officer Chen called for backup to handle the multiple suspects and the moving truck situation. Emily was handcuffed first, still screaming about how this was insane and how she was just trying to move in with family. Dad was next, loudly protesting that this was police overreach and demanding to speak to a supervisor. Mom was crying hysterically as Officer Chen cuffed her, wailing about how her family was being destroyed over a simple misunderstanding. The two friends who'd come to help Emily move were questioned and released, since they'd had no knowledge of the situation and had been operating under Emily's false information. But my parents and Emily were officially charged with criminal trespassing, attempted breaking and entering, and disturbing the peace. Emily's reality finally crashed when Officer Martinez read her the charges. "You're under arrest for criminal trespassing, attempted breaking and entering, and disturbing the peace. You have the right to remain silent." Emily got arrested for trying to break into someone else's apartment. But Emily wasn't going quietly. As soon as she processed what was happening, she began having a complete public meltdown that drew the attention of everyone in the apartment complex. Neighbors came out to their balconies to watch the spectacle of a grown woman screaming at police officers. "This is ridiculous," she shrieked while being escorted to the police car. "I'm being arrested because my brother sold his apartment without telling me. This is a family issue, not a criminal matter." Mom joined in the hysteria, her voice reaching a pitch that probably violated noise ordinances. "Alex, how could you do this to your sister? We're your family. Emily doesn't deserve to be arrested because you decided to be vindictive." Dad was alternating between rage and desperate bargaining. "Officer, my son is clearly having some kind of mental breakdown. He's not thinking clearly. Can't we work this out without involving the justice system?" The scene was getting worse by the minute. Emily was pulling against the officer's grip, still trying to argue her case while in handcuffs. Mom was hyperventilating and accusing me of destroying the family over petty revenge. Dad was threatening to sue everyone involved, including the police department, the apartment complex, and me. Mom screamed that I was destroying the family. But Officer Martinez wasn't having any of their dramatic performance. He approached me while his partner handled the booking procedures, speaking in a professional tone that carried across the parking lot for everyone to hear. "Sir, I want to clarify something for the record. You had every legal right to sell your property without notifying anyone. Property owners are not required to inform family members of real estate transactions. Your family's assumption that they could use your property without permission, especially after you'd sold it, constitutes criminal trespassing. He continued, making sure the neighbors who were watching could hear his validation. Attempting to force entry into someone else's residence is a serious crime, regardless of family relationships. You acted appropriately by allowing the legal system to handle this situation rather than enabling criminal behavior. The officer's words carried weight and authority that my family's emotional manipulation never could. The officer said I had every right to sell my own property. Emily's breakdown reached its peak when the full reality of her situation hit her. She wasn't just losing her housing solution, she was facing criminal charges, potential jail time, and the end of her safety net. Her voice cracked as the realization sank in. "What am I supposed to do now?" she screamed at me from the back of the police car. "I don't have anywhere to live. I don't have money for bail. I don't have a job." For the first time in her 31 years, Emily was facing problems that couldn't be solved by calling Alex. The family's default problem solver was standing right there watching her get arrested, and he wasn't lifting a finger to help her. "Alex!" she sobbed desperately. "You can't just leave me like this. I'm your sister." But I wasn't the family problem solver anymore. I was just a guy watching the consequences of 3 decades of entitled behavior finally catch up with the people who'd created them. Emily realized she'd have to solve her own problems for once. I stood in the apartment parking lot completely calm, watching my family face the first real consequences they'd experienced for their behavior. The police were handling everything professionally. The new tenant was safely back in her legally rented apartment. The moving truck would be impounded as evidence. For the first time in 26 years, an Emily crisis was being solved by someone other than Alex. The police department was now responsible for processing her problems. The legal system would determine her consequences. Her parents would have to figure out bail money and lawyers and housing solutions. Emily looked at me one last time before the police car pulled away, and I could see in her eyes the moment she understood that everything had changed. Her default problem solver had solved his own problem by disappearing completely. Emily realized that her default problem solver had solved his own problem by disappearing. The legal aftermath was swift and unforgiving. Emily, Mom, and Dad were all charged with criminal trespassing and disturbing the peace. Emily's charges were elevated to attempted breaking and entering because she'd physically tried to force her way into the building. They spent the night in jail since no one could make bail immediately. Emily had to explain her criminal charges to potential landlords, which made her housing search even more difficult than it already was. Most rental applications ask about criminal history, and attempted breaking and entering doesn't exactly scream responsible tenant. She ended up having to sign a lease with a co-signer, Mom and Dad, and pay 6 months' rent up front. Dad had to take time off work to attend court hearings, which affected his income and his standing at his job. Mom's church friends found out about the arrests when the story made the local newspaper's police blotter, causing her significant social embarrassment in her tightly knit community. All 3 of them received probation, community service, and hefty fines. Emily had to explain trespassing charges to her new landlord. The family dynamic changed permanently. Emily ended up moving in with our parents because she couldn't afford her own place while dealing with legal fees and the damage to her rental history. Mom and Dad finally had to handle Emily's constant crises firsthand 24 hours a day without being able to transfer the problems to me. Dad learned what it was like to have Emily's financial emergencies interrupting his workday. Mom discovered how exhausting it was to manage Emily's emotional breakdowns and housing instability on a daily basis. They got a taste of what I'd been dealing with for 26 years and it took them exactly 3 weeks to start complaining about Emily's lack of responsibility. But there was no Alex to call anymore. They'd permanently lost their default problem solver. The family learned to solve problems without their default problem solver. As for me, I moved into a new apartment across town, a place my family doesn't know the address to. I have their numbers blocked on my phone. I changed jobs to a company where they can't find me. For the first time in my adult life, I have genuine peace and quiet. My evenings are my own. My weekends belong to me. When my phone rings, it's never an Emily emergency requiring immediate attention and financial assistance. I have money in my savings account because I'm not constantly bailing someone else out of their self-created disasters. I sleep better knowing that every problem Emily creates now lands squarely on the people who enabled her behavior for 3 decades. Sometimes the best way to stop being the solution is to disappear completely.